Welcome to our channel. The wind howled across the frozen hills of Bozeman, Montana, carrying the sharp scent of pine and sagebrush. Snow blanketed the valley like a burial shroud, soft and endless, swallowing fences, fields, and memories alike. Lad Callahan stepped out of his old Ram pickup, the engine ticking in the cold. The farmhouse stood on the ridge, ahead small, crooked, half-buried snow drifts. To most it looked like a ruin. To him it looked like quiet, and quiet was all he wanted. He was 38, tall and lean, built by years of ranch work and rodeo rings. His face was weathered, cheekbones sharp beneath a dark stubble, a faint scar above his eyebrow from a bull that threw him years ago. His dark brown cowboy hat was pulled low, shadowing his face, though the wind tossed his dark hair loose. But it was his eyes that told the real story. Hazel, distant, like a man still watching something good disappear over the horizon. He hadn't felt right in years. The echo was always there, the crack of bone, the roar of the crowd, the silence after an injury that ended his career. For Lad, it was just the quiet that followed a life that was no longer his. His fiancée had left a year ago. She didn't cry, she just stood in the doorway one morning, bags packed, and said, "You left the ring, but you never really came back." Lad didn't stop her. He didn't know how. Now, with his last $10,000 in savings, he'd bought this abandoned farmhouse in northern Montana, 10 acres of forgotten land, where no one would bother him. He planned to fix the roof, mend the fences, and maybe remember what peace felt like. He pulled his shearling coat tighter and started up the narrow driveway, boots crunching in the ice. Each breath left a faint cloud that vanished before his next step. The world here was quiet enough to hear his own heartbeat. For the first time in a long time, that felt like something close to hope. Then he saw it, a thin ribbon of smoke rising from the chimney. Lad stopped. His breath froze midair. That wasn't possible. The fireplace didn't work. He'd inspected it himself when he bought the place. The flue was packed with soot, the hearth full of bird nests. But now, faint and steady, smoke curled against the gray sky. He frowned, scanning the yard. The snow was clean near his truck, untouched. But closer to the porch he spotted them, faint indentations too small to be his, footprints, 2 sets, one human, one animal. Something cold moved through him, not fear but caution, the kind that never left a man who worked the land. His right hand rested on his thigh, a habit from years of being ready for anything. He climbed the steps quietly, testing each board before putting his weight down. The porch sagged under him with a long groan. The air smelled of burning pine and something else, something human. Curtain near the front window trembled. Lad froze. Someone was inside. He didn't call out. Instead, he listened. Skill that came from years of tracking lost cattle and waiting for storms to pass. Inside, faintly, he thought he heard movement, a creak, then stillness. Snow drifted lazily through the open sky. The world felt suspended, as if even the wind was waiting to see what he'd do next. Lad reached the door. Frost glazed the handle, catching the dying daylight. He hesitated for a heartbeat. The absurd thought crossed his mind that maybe he was imagining this. Maybe the smoke was nothing but old memories curling back to life. He knocked once, no answer. He knocked again, harder, still nothing. The valley was silent except for the soft hiss of falling snow. Lad exhaled slowly, the breath shaking just enough to betray him. He reached for the handle and Turned unlocked. The latch gave a tired click. The door creaked open an inch, releasing a faint breath of warm air that brushed against his face. Fire. Light mixed with something else he couldn't name, and then from somewhere deep inside the farmhouse came a sound. Low, uncertain, not quite a growl, not quite a voice. Lad stood motionless, one hand on the doorframe, listening as the warmth spilled out into the cold. It wasn't the house breathing, it wasn't the fire, it was something alive. Warmth spilled into the hallway as Lad stepped inside, the heat from the small fire brushing against his face. For a moment he just stood there, letting his eyes adjust from the pale blizzard outside to the flicker of orange light. Within, the air smelled faintly of pine and damp wool and something human. The living room looked nothing like it had weeks ago. The floor had been swept. Stack of firewood leaned neatly against the wall. The broken window had been patched with cardboard and duct tape. Someone had tried to make the place livable again, one careful piece at a time. Then he saw movement near the fireplace, a figure frozen mid-motion. Young man stood there, both hands clutching an old tin cup as if it could protect him. He looked to be in his late teens, maybe 18. His hair was a sandy brown, uncombed bed and falling into his eyes, framing a pale face that had forgotten warmth. A thin gray coat hung loosely over his wiry frame. His boots were scuffed, his jeans torn at one knee. He looked like someone who hadn't had a home in a long time, but it was his eyes that held red, a shade of blue that seemed to flicker between fear and defiance. At his side stood a German shepherd, its fur thick and mottled tan and black. Its muscles were taut, ears pinned back, a low growl rolling deep in its throat. The dog's eyes were sharp, intelligent, untrusting, alert to every move Lad made. Lad raised a hand slightly, his voice low and calm. Easy, boy. The young man swallowed, his fingers trembling around the cup. Please don't call the police, he said, his voice soft but strained. We'll leave, we just needed somewhere warm. He studied him for a long moment. He rested a hand gently on the dog's neck. Me and Apollo. The dog stopped growling, though his tail remained stiff, waiting for a signal. Lad kept his body relaxed. You picked the wrong place to hide, he said quietly. I didn't know anyone owned it. His eyes darted to the door. It looked empty. He scanned the room again. The blankets near the hearth, the carefully cleaned space, the empty cans lined up by the window. This wasn't the chaos of squatters or drifters. It was the order of someone trying to survive with dignity. Why here? He asked finally. Phil hesitated, his lips parting as if he'd been holding his story inside for too long. Because it was far, he said softly. Far from town, far from everyone. His voice cracked, but he forced himself to continue. My family, they kicked me out 2 months ago. Lad didn't move. Go on, I'm gay, he said, the words coming out in a rush of cold air. I told my dad and my stepmom. They're very religious, they said. They said it was a choice, a sin, that I couldn't stay in their house unless I agreed to go to a camp to be fixed. His blue eyes flickered toward the fire, the reflection trembling in his pupils. I refused. He gave me an hour to pack a bag. A week later, he'd canceled my bank account and my phone ring. Jaw tightened. He didn't interrupt. After that, everything fell apart. My mom died years ago, so it was just me. I tried to stay with friends, but my dad called their parents. I slept in my car until I ran out of gas and money. He reached down to stroke Apollo's fur, his voice dropping. He was Mom's dog. My dad was going to take him to the pound, couldn't let him. I packed up what I could and just walked. We've been staying in shelters when we can, but most don't take dogs. Lad felt something shift in his chest. He knew what it meant to be adrift, cut off from the life you thought was yours. He glanced at the dog. Apollo watched him steadily, ears twitching, nose flaring slightly as if reading his intent. He's well trained, Lad said. Effing noid faintly. He's smarter than most people I know. The fire popped, throwing sparks up the stone chimney. Outside, the wind howled, pressing snow against the windows. Inside, the silence stretched heavy but not empty. Lad finally spoke. You got anywhere to go? He shook his head. Every shelter's full. The sheriff in the last town said I should move on. Lad caught the bitterness in his tone, that quiet, cold kind of anger that comes from realizing the world isn't built to help people like you. He stared at the fire for a long moment, thinking he was just a kid. He didn't owe him anything, but something in his story, a kid thrown out for who he was, stirred something buried in him, a memory of being told his life was over, that he had to be something else. He rubbed a hand over his face, feeling the rough scrape of his beard. You can stay tonight, he said finally. But tomorrow we talk about what comes next. Phil blinked, eyes wide. You mean it? Don't make me regret it. He nodded quickly, whispering, thank you. Apollo seemed to sense the change, lowering himself near the fire, head resting on his paws, eyes half closed but alert. The tension in the room eased slightly. Lad turned toward the door, glancing back once at the boy and his dog curled near the fire. For the first time in years, the sound of another person's breathing filled the space that had once been only his thoughts. He stepped outside, closing the door softly. Behind him, the night air bit at his skin and the chimney smoke twisted upward into the pale moonlight. It was strange, he thought, how a man could buy a house to escape the world, only to find it already occupied by the very thing he'd been avoiding. Life, the days, blurred together in a rhythm that neither of them expected. The farmhouse, once a hollow shell of decay, began to breathe again. Mornings were filled with the creak of tools, the scraping of shovels, and the soft pant of Apollo patrolling the perimeter. Evenings they shared silence, the kind that no longer felt heavy. Lad repaired the roof and reinforced the beams, his hands steady despite the ache in his bones that came with the cold. Phil learned to light fires properly, to mend curtains from scraps, to cook with whatever they had. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. Fragile piece stitched together by exhaustion and quiet understanding. Outside, the Montana winter deepened. The wind sliced through the trees and the snow grew thicker, heavier, as if the world wanted to bury them all. Yet inside, warmth returned, not just from the fire but from something unseen. Apollo remained the sentry of their small kingdom. He was never fully at rest. His ears twitched at the faintest sound, and at night he patrolled the yard with slow, deliberate steps. His coat, thick and shining, glowed in the firelight. When Phil laughed, a rare, quiet sound, Apollo would lift his head, as if proud to hear it. One evening, as the wind howled like a wounded animal, Lad was tightening the lock on the back door when Apollo began barking. Not the short warning bark he gave when a rabbit darted past. This was different. Urgent, guttural. The dog charged toward The back of the property kicking up. Snow. Lad grabbed his flashlight and followed, boots sinking deep into the drifts. Apollo, easy boy. The barking stopped near the old barn, a structure Lad had barely looked at since he bought the place. It was little more than a skeleton of timber, its roof half collapsed under years of snow. Apollo stood at the entrance, teeth bared, his tail stiff. He pawed at one section of the wall, whining. Phil appeared moments later, breathless, clutching a lantern. "What's wrong?" Lad swept his light across the barn. Nothing moved but shadows and dust, yet Apollo refused to stop. He scratched at a section of loose floorboards near the back wall, then barked again. 3 sharp bursts, then a low growl. "He's found something," Phil said, his voice trembling slightly. He crouched beside Apollo, pressing a hand to his back. "Good boy, show me." Lad knelt beside them. The floorboards there looked different, pried up once before. He worked his knife into the seam and lifted. The old timber gave way with a groan, and a narrow cavity appeared in the packed earth beneath. From within, Lad pulled out a small metal box, surface sealed with tape to keep out the moisture. It was heavier than it looked. The hinges were rusted shut. Phil's lantern flickered as he whispered, "What is that?" "Something your dog wanted us to find," Lad said, his voice low. He set the box on the ground and pried it open carefully with the blade. Inside were journals wrapped in a layer of plastic, old photographs, and a bundle of letters. The air filled with the scent of old paper. Phil knelt beside him, his breath quickening. Lad handed him the first journal. It was bound in worn leather, the handwriting elegant and familiar. Phil's hand flew to his mouth. "It's my mom's," he said once. "She whispered, voice breaking, that he hid a time capsule for me out here before he died. This barn belonged to an old friend of hers. I thought it was just a story he told me as a kid." Apollo sat beside him now, calm and steady, watching them both as if his job was done. Phil opened the journal, his fingers tracing the words his mother wrote of her hopes for him, of her unconditional love. The last entry, dated just before her death, read, "Whoever you become, whoever you love, you are my son and you are my pride. Never let anyone convince you otherwise." Tears streamed down Phil's face. Tucked inside was a letter addressed to his father. In it, his mother pleaded with him to love their son without condition, warning him that his rigid faith would one day cost him everything. Lad glanced around the barn, suddenly alert again. He felt a shift in the air. This wasn't just a memory, it was a shield. Phil looked at him with fear and anger tangled in his expression. He read this. "I know he did. And he still threw me out." Lad stood, fists tightening at his sides. "I've seen what fear does to people, men who think their way is the only way, but they make one mistake every time. They think no one will fight back." He turned to him, the light catching the scar on his brow. "Now you have her words." Phil stared down at the box, at his mother's handwriting, at the proof that he was, and always had, been loved. "And what do I do with it?" Lad's eyes met his, steady, resolute. "You remember what it means, and you don't stop until you build a life she would have been proud of." The wind howled outside, shaking the barn walls. But for the first time since he'd bought this farm, Lad didn't feel the cold. The storm came without warning. By dusk, the wind howled through the valley, flinging snow across the farmhouse in violent sheets. Inside, the fire sputtered as Lad secured the windows. He moved with quiet efficiency, his Expression carved from stone, Phil stood. Near the hearth, his face pale in the flickering light. He had traded his tattered coat for one of Lad's far too big, the sleeves rolled up twice. In his hands he held one of his mother's journals. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, his voice barely audible over the storm. Lad glanced at him, eyes sharp and focused. "We have to be ready. People like your father don't just give up." Apollo paced near the door, restless, his breath steaming in the cold air that seeped through the cracks. The dog's fur stood in rough ridges, his instincts tuned to the danger ahead. He was the only one who didn't need convincing. They didn't have to wait long. Just before nightfall, headlights cut through the storm, beams of white slicing through gray. A large black SUV pulled up the drive. Apollo let out a low growl that rumbled in his chest. "Down, Lad," said softly. He killed the lamp, plunging the room into darkness. The world outside was a blur of snow and faint movement. The front door rattled. Then a heavy fist pounded against the wood. "Phil, I know you're in there. Open this door right now." It was his father's voice, booming and angry. Lad stood motionless in the shadows. Phil trembled, clutching Apollo's collar. The front window shattered, shards scattering across the floor. Two men pushed through the opening, his father and a taller, broader man who looked like his older brother. They wore heavy coats, their faces red with cold and fury. "There you are," his father snarled, his eyes locking on Phil. "You're coming home. We're getting you the help you need." Apollo launched first. The blare of fur and fury hit the brother at chest level, knocking him backward into the wall. He screamed as Apollo clamped down on his arm, teeth tearing through the sleeve. Phil's father lunged for him, but Lad was already moving. Years of wrestling steers and staying balanced on a bucking bull took over. He hit the man low, using his own momentum against him, sending him stumbling to the floor. The fight was fast, violent, and silent. Except for the grunts of impact, Lad stood over the man, his breath steady, but his eyes cold. "Get out of my house," he said, his voice a low growl. "Both of you." He looked from Lad's hardened face to the dog still holding his other son at bay. Defeated, he helped his son up and they retreated through the broken window, disappearing into the blizzard. By dawn the storm had passed. Snow lay thick and silent over the land, covering the tracks but not the damage. In the weak light of morning, Lad and Phil stood outside, watching the sun break through the gray clouds. Within hours a call had been made, not to the police, but to a number Phil found in the back of his mother's journal. It belonged to his uncle, his mother's brother Gavin, a man his father had cut out of their lives years ago. Gavin arrived the next day. He was a man in his early 40s with his sister's kind eyes and a steady presence. He pulled Phil into a hug that lasted for a full minute, whispering that he'd been searching for him for weeks. Gavin was a single father, raising a young daughter on his own in Denver. His gaze fell on Lad and his expression filled with a gratitude that words couldn't capture. The backlash was quiet but firm. With Gavin's help, a restraining order was filed. The letter from Phil's mother became a centerpiece in a legal battle that ended with Phil's father agreeing to a settlement and to stay away for good. Phil's inheritance from his mother, long held in a trust his father controlled, was released. Phil looked at the number on the paper, a silent testament to the future his mother had wanted for him. Spring came late too. Montana, the last snow melted in reluctant patches across the valley, uncovering the dark earth beneath, and with it a sense that life somehow had endured. Lad Callahan stood on the porch of the farmhouse, now fully repaired, its roof glinting under the pale sunlight. The sharp wind that once carried only silence now brought faint laughter from the nearby road where trucks and volunteers came and went. Behind him, the wooden sign above the entrance read, Apollo's Haven. Phil had chosen the name himself. He was there, now no longer a scared teen, but a confident young man directing volunteers. He had decided to use his inheritance to turn the old farm into a refuge, a place for LGBTQ plus youth who had been kicked out, a place where they and their pets would always be welcome. Lad, with his quiet resolve, had become his silent partner. He handled maintenance, repairs, and logistics. More than that, he became a steady presence, showing others that recovery didn't mean forgetting, but building. Gavin was there too. He had taken leave of absence from his job as an architect in Denver to help design and build the new dormitories. He and Lad worked side by side, a comfortable silence often stretching between them, filled with the sound of hammers and saws. They found an easy rhythm in their work and in their conversations. One afternoon, a television crew arrived. 2 journalists from a national station. The reporter, a woman with sharp blue eyes, asked to film a short piece about the center. Paulo stole the spotlight. Of course, cameras followed him as he greeted new arrivals, his calm demeanor a balm for frayed nerves. Children from local schools came every weekend to help in the garden where raised beds now held rows of young vegetables. Phil taught them how to nurture the soil, how life could start again, even after a winter that felt endless. That evening, as the camera crew left, the valley was bathed in gold. Lad stood by the porch rail, watching Gavin lock up the main door. The air smelled of pine and thawing earth. Your sister would have liked this, Lad said. Gavin smiled softly, joining him at the rail. She used to tell me that a house isn't where you live, it's where others are welcome. He turned to face Lad, the last of the sunlight catching in his hazel eyes. Thank you for what you did for Phil, for all of this. Lad just nodded, his throat tight. He's a good kid. He deserved a safe place to land. We all do, Gavin said quietly. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the scent of spring rain. Apollo lay down near the steps, head resting on his paws. Behind them, laughter echoed from the community hall. People once broken, now building again. Gavin's hand brushed against Lad's on the railing. It wasn't an accident. Lad looked at him and saw his own hope, his own fear, and his own quiet longing reflected back at him. In a world that had become quiet, this felt like the first note of a new song. The farmhouse stood strong, its walls no longer hiding secrets but sheltering hope. And as the last light faded over Montana's hills, 2 lives once set adrift by loss had found their way home. Thanks for watching.